Mm. Okay, all right. So, quick intro and the story with Kerry. Kerry has been talking about buyer's journey for almost all his life. When he was a serious citizen, after that, and then now at Sixth Sense. When we were researching our company, we saw lots of information from him. And I was one of those who consumed nonstop TikTok style videos of Kerry online. Created a high impression of, my God, he must be God of the space, but was so hesitant in reaching out to him. So I thought there must be millions of people who are reaching out to Kerry. Why will he respond to us? So what we did was we had already started building our product. So we ran AdamX synthetic buyer anonymously for his company, Sixth Sense. And we were able to find some of the flaws in their execution. And I was ready to pitch in. I says, if you don't believe us, let me show you. But I just said the concept to him on LinkedIn, and he replied and said, I love it. I want to talk to you. We never had to show him that. He's amazing. And now, Kerry, for all of you. Kerry, take it away.
Thank you. And I might have just messed up the spotlight there. Thank you. Got it back. So thank you very much, Neil, for that very nice introduction. And I'm honored to take part in this. And I think this is very exciting for me. I'm going to talk just about the research and how we got here and why I think this is such an important advance in the way that we think about understanding buyers in B2B. And I don't have a ton of time, so I'm going to get right to it. So for those of you who don't know, I was with Serious Decisions and Forrester as an analyst for about 8 years with Sixth Sense right now for the last 3, and I run a little research practice. But we've been able to do quite a bit of primary research on buyer journeys over the last couple of years. We've surveyed 3,400, 3,500 recent buyers in B2B, and we titled our first research report, It's Nearly Over Before You Know It. And if you haven't seen the research from us, you'll know why that is the title in just a minute. So a couple of basic parameters. Deals in our research were about 250K deals on average. There was an 11-month or 11.5-month buying process associated with those. And buying groups for those purchases were about 11 as well. So we surveyed individuals, and those individuals came from all different buyer personas, all the different kind of roles in a buying process, levels in the organization, lots of different industries, not even just SaaS, but lots of others as well. So the question is, what are those buying processes like? So unless you have a prior relationship with members of that buying group that you're interested in doing a deal with, then those people do not want to engage with you, and in fact won't engage with you until they're about 70% of the way through their journey. Now, that's not a new number with us. That's a number, Serious Decisions had a number that was like that. Gartner's got a number that says something very similar, asking similar questions. So it's very consistent finding that buyers don't want to engage with you until you can think roughly 2/3 of the way through their buying journey. Now, what we also found is that buyers initiate that first engagement 81% of the time. In other words, they're not just responding because you emailed. They're going to initiate that first contact the vast majority of the time. And then one thing that is super important to understand is that buyers, so if you just think roughly 80% of the time buyers are driving that first engagement, well, what about the other 20%? Maybe that happens sooner because BDRs, sales reps or whatever are calling them, right? And the answer is no. Whether you initiate that contact or the buyer initiates that contact, it happens at the exact same time. And the conclusion you draw from that is that whether you're calling them or emailing them has no bearing on when or if they're going to engage with you. And that's why we call the second report that we've done this a radical new view of buying and selling in B2B, because the whole enterprise of B2B demand gen, where we get people to fill out forms and then we chase them down with our BDRs, that whole thing is based on the idea that we can trick people into filling out our forms, and we can cause them to engage with us by calling and emailing them. And what buyers say is, No, you can't. That's not how it works. All right. So if that's not jarring or shocking enough yet, what should get everyone's attention is that over the 2 years of our surveys, buyers said, first of all, 85% of the time, they've either mostly or completely established their requirements prior to the time they talk to sellers. And on average, they know who the winner is going to be by 70% of the way through the journey. So they don't decide who the winner is going to be at 99% and then sign a contract. They decide who the winner is going to be 70% of the way through. And the last 30% of the buying journey, that thing that we know of as a sales cycle, is really a validation cycle for the buyer. But they're doing that validation cycle with 3 or 4 other vendors. And you don't know, for the most part, whether you're on the top of that list at that time or you're somewhere else on that list. If you're not on the top of the list, by the time they decide that they'll engage with you and start that validation cycle, then you're going to go through that sales cycle. You're going to put that thing into pipeline. You're going to do the demos and do all of those things, not knowing that you really never had a chance in that deal. And that's been going on for a long time. This isn't new buyer behavior. As soon as buyers have been able to understand who you are and get product information, all of that online, it's been this way. All right, so a couple of other things that are really important to understand, and Neil alluded to this earlier, but buyers buy from their day one shortlist 90% of the time. That's a number that's also replicated by Bain in an HBR article. We found the exact same thing. What we found is some more detail, and that is that on day one, buyers have already put 4 of the 5 vendors that they're going to evaluate on the short list. Right? So there's only room for one vendor. Once they start that buying journey, there's only room for one more vendor to get on. So once buyers go out into market and start doing research, it's not to educate themselves on the category and the vendors in that category most of the time. Most of the time, they know who the vendors are. And in fact, they told us that they have prior experience with the vendors that they're going to evaluate 75% of the time, right? So that also, it's important to know that that goes for everybody who's part of that buying group. So all of the people involved, the financial backer, the financial ratifier, rather, the purchasing people. And when you think about who these people are in their companies, they're generally pretty senior people. They're people who've been around for a while. So they've been through buying processes. They know who the vendors are. And when we think now about what that means about the buying process, you've got 11 people, 4 or 5 different opinions about which vendor they ought to buy or whether they should buy anything. And you have an 11-month arm wrestling match over which vendor is going to be the consensus pick. Right? So most of that buying process is not about educating from scratch. They're not blank slates when they start off. Most of that buying process is each member of that buying group trying to arm themselves to win the argument about which vendor is going to be chosen. Right? And that's a very different perspective on the buying journey, I think, than what we've had. But if I want to recap this whole thing, what I would say is buying journeys take about a year on average. They're going to evaluate 4 to 5 vendors. They know most of them on day one. They've got experience with most of them before they start this particular buying cycle. If you wait for buyers to come to your website, fill out a form, and then engage with you later on, you will be harvesting deals that have already been decided. You'll win whichever ones you win, but you won't have any control over it. If you want to have some control over which ones you win, you have to know what it looks like when your buyers go into market, when they start that journey, how long they're in that journey, when they actually decide, and whether what they're seeing and hearing when they're not talking to you is winning over your competitors. And this is what I love so much about what I saw with AdamX, is the ability to see inside what's happening in those buying journeys that are happening completely outside of your control. They're happening they're not talking to you while they're making these decisions. They're out on their own. What's happening in those? To be honest, I don't think anybody really knows. And I think that's what's so exciting about AdamX, is really being able to wrap your head around what's happening in those buying processes before they talk to us, because that's when they make the decisions. So I won't drag things on longer. I wish I could be there with you all tonight, so I apologize for not being able to be there. But I'm very excited about this, and I hope you all are too.